energy crisis in the shadow of Russian aggression on Ukraine. Please welcome our first speaker. He is the president of the workers group of EESC. He's coming from Austrian Federation of Workers. Please welcome Oliver Röpke.
The Russian aggression against Ukraine forces us to either slide back to coal, which still plays a significant role in the EU, or double down on renewable deployment. And the European Green Deal and the Repower EU initiative aim in this direction. So the war has also reminded us of the problems of relying on very few suppliers for resources. We must keep this in mind when deploying renewables too. Solar panels, batteries and turbines need a great deal of metals such as lithium, cobalt and rare earth elements. For these, the top 3 producing nations control well over 3/4 of global output. China accounts for 60% of rare earth production and refines well over 90% of them. Together with our almost complete dependency on imports for microchips and other industrial parts, this makes our economies extremely vulnerable.
I would like to greet you all on behalf of a small Croatian community which supports energy and green transition in Europe and the world. We are not substituting renewables for fossil fuels. We are changing the whole society, the way we think, the way we plan, which has and does not have that much to do with low carbon. There will always be natural gas, there will always be oil. I used to work for the hydrocarbons industry. We are going to be using electricity not just to move around, but to heat, to do everything, and that will be renewable electric power. But this is not only about low carbon, it goes for efficiency, new technologies and planning for the point in time when we will be able to use energy when it's suitable to us.
I've been very active as a climate activist. 15 years ago, I was shutting down coal-fired power stations. I've been arrested multiple times, so that is my background. And I used to protest nuclear energy. I was one of the people that used to say, we don't need it, it's bad, and I changed my mind. And the reason I changed my mind is because I was wrong. First of all, there is lots of evidence right now that shows us around the world that when they phased out nuclear power, it's been replaced too much by fossil fuels, sometimes a little bit of renewables, which is good, but too much by fossil fuels. If you look at the United Nations reports, if you look at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, this report has 99% consensus of scientists. This is a very high number of scientists around the world, climate scientists telling us this report is serious, take it seriously, and that same report has a chapter on mitigation. That section on mitigation by Working Group 3 says that we need nuclear energy to decarbonise along with renewables. It has 4 decarbonisation pathways, and all 4 pathways include a substantial amount of nuclear that the world is currently not meeting. The world currently has about 16% clean energy mix, only 4% of that is from nuclear. So it's not just about my opinion, it's about what the science says. We talk about following the science, we need to make sure that we are thorough and consistent in doing that. And the reason I'm now here talking about nuclear energy is because I fear that I did damage in helping to shut nuclear down over the years, and that we now need to undo some of that damage in order to actually decarbonise and to phase out fossil fuels.
10 years ago, the International Energy Agency estimated that with existing conditions and technology, we could reduce energy use by 50% in all sectors. We can start at home, and from a climate perspective, I think you all know these numbers, 1/3 of CO2 emissions. From an energy perspective, 40% of energy consumption, about 80% of that would be fossil fuels, and certainly we have plenty of work to be done with 75% of Europe's buildings inefficient. There is money available. You go across the multi-annual financial framework, the Just Transition Fund, the Modernisation Fund, Recovery and Resilience Facility, and this amounts to thousands of billions, or if I can say it, trillions, just under 2 trillion euro, that can be used for the energy renovation of buildings. Now this is, I'm not implying that public finance is going to do the whole job, but there is money there.
What is an underlying problem? we've got less gas and oil. Supply of this is much smaller. And demand is because we've got the same cars, we've got the same houses, we've got the same installations. So you have the same elements, and you need this gas and oil. And therefore, because it's less of importation, then your prices goes up. Are these high prices really very bad? And the carbon price would make fossil fuels more expensive, and then will help to shift to renewable fuels. So what has happened is that the aggression of Russia on Ukraine has speeded up transition to look for new renewable sources, to expand renewable sources, and also to look for energy efficiency. There's no quick fix here. You have to wait a bit. People are expecting that Europe do a lot, but you have to ask also your own governments whether they allow Europe to do as much as is possible.
One of the things that's changed a lot, I would say, in the last 10 years is that private finance wants to get in on the game. Public-private investment is really the blend that is being called for, but banks are not in a position to drive demand, and that is something where civil society organizations can make a big difference.
There are big trends now in Europe regarding the household consumers. They are buying massively solar panels and installing solar panels. While they are not isolating their homes, they are not thinking about the situation in their homes. Basically, they are heating the climate with solar panels. I can tell you the statistics is 1 to 4% of buildings that we refurbish or renovate in Europe. So this rate is not sufficient if we want to move forward regarding Green Deal targets. And regarding electricity, demand is not decreasing in the future. It is increasing massively.
Since the Ukrainian crisis began, solarization is over 200%. Croatian citizens and Croatian entrepreneurs, businesses, started investing in solar energy in the past year, and the Croatian government has been undertaking a lot of measures in the area. Our strategy is very good, and we are absorbing a certain amount of EU funds for this end. And I personally believe in solarization because it is economically the most efficient and the cheapest form of electricity generation, but also for heating and for cooling, both for households and for businesses. All countries have sufficient insulation to efficiently generate electricity from solar power from the sun.
It's a huge role of consumers. Look what they are choosing now. They're choosing not only solar panels, but also heat pumps, other things. Maybe less in insulation, but you have to remember that insulation of a house might be simple in some cases, but generally it's very expensive exercise.
For millions of people, for tens of millions of people, I would say, there is no choice about energy. They don't have the choice. Of course, some people do have the choice, but many people do not have any choice. So the rise in energy prices is very bad for them, and I understand that some people make a lot of money out of the energy crisis, but I can tell you that workers in France, where we've had the Gilets jaunes, you can tell these workers everything about the rise of energy prices, and they will tell you that if the energy transition is about the situation that we have now, they don't want the energy transition. Energy is not a basic commodity like any other. Energy should be part and parcel of public services, of services of general interest. And the current situation shows that the market does not function properly. No, let us face it, the market does not function properly, so we should have another approach. We should manage and regulate on a number of aspects. Photovoltaics is something really interesting, and electric mobility is also very interesting. But we don't have any sector which provides us with autonomy. So we will depend on Chinese rare earth and raw materials. So we need batteries to be made in Europe, to be produced in Europe.
cheap energy is possible only when renewables win over fossil fuels. Until that point, we will be dependent on Russia or on Africa, on Russian uranium, or Nigerian oil, or Algerian natural gas. The times of cheap energy are over, cheap electricity.
I completely agree about energy reduction. We should be looking at insulating houses. We should be building them to passive house standards. Some places this is happening. Some places in Britain this is happening not nearly enough. Yes, it is complicated to insulate houses, but it saves so much in even just health benefits. People who suffer from respiratory issues because they have damp in their houses end up costing the NHS more. There's lots of issues. But I think too many of these discussions focus on reducing the demand, but we are an energy-intensive culture. I don't think this is going to change anytime soon. From the advent of using fire to warm us and being able to, we discovered the use of fire and we were then able to preserve food that then was so calorie dense that we didn't have to hunt so much, and then our brains grew bigger. Energy is life. Energy is central to the way we live. Now the problem is that we developed a high quality of life. This is really good, but we did it with fossil fuels. We burned a lot of fossil fuels, and unfortunately that has had drastic impacts for the climate and also for air pollution. Millions of people die every year, something like 9 million people from air pollution from fossil fuels alone. This never gets mentioned. This is a reason, even if you didn't care about climate change, this is something that we should have been talking about. We've known this about this for decades. We should reduce demand, like where we need to reduce it, but we should also prepare for a future that might require more energy, because historically that is what has always happened with humans. I'm not saying that because I think we should waste energy. I'm saying that because energy abundance is the outcome of dealing with energy poverty. It's where we have energy security, it's where we have cheap electricity. That's energy abundance. So we actually need to build as much clean energy as possible. Yes, it will have environmental costs. Yes, it's very difficult because we have to get some resources from China. Uranium's not only from Russia, by the way. Actually, Canada is one of the biggest exporters of uranium. Australia is the third biggest exporter of uranium in the world. Lithium often comes from China. This is unfortunate. So we should, when we talk about just transition, we should look at all of these issues. We shouldn't say, let's not build them because there are issues. There are issues with lithium mining, or in Britain we're now starting to mine for lithium. I think this is really good. These are good jobs for people. But ultimately, everything requires mining. There is no way to have an energy transition without mining. So let's make sure they're good jobs. Let's make sure the workers are supported. Again, in Britain, we're looking at people getting more electric vehicles, also heat pumps. At the same time, we're reducing demand, we're insulating houses, but we're using more electricity, not less. And I don't see a future where we will suddenly just not need electricity. Let's please not pretend that energy is just like, someone once said to me, are we addicted to energy? Energy is life. This is not an addiction. We need this so that we don't live in poverty. This is how we lifted out of poverty, and now many countries of the world want that same right, that same privilege, and they're going to have to need a lot of electricity to do it. I'm not speaking against renewables. I think we should build renewables, but I think it's a fallacy that we keep saying it's cheaper, it's the cheapest. It's not necessarily true for the consumer. In Australia, where they're building a lot of renewables, it's actually very expensive to the consumer, and now there's a backlash because people are so unhappy and they're saying, I thought my bills would be lower. So we need to be realistic about expectations. What I would say is, yeah, it may cost more because you have to build grid storage and connect the grid and all of these things, but it is still not the cost to life that is the same as fossil fuels. And on a long-term basis, the cost of global warming, of global heating, is going to cost the global economy trillions. So we need to think about that when we say, well, this is expensive or that's expensive. It's expensive, but it's an investment for the future. Also, just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the cheapest electricity to consumer was in France. What does France have that other people don't have? France had a 70% clean energy mix from nuclear. They built lots of nuclear reactors in the 1980s, and they have had a clean energy mix ever since. These are good jobs. These are workers in unionized jobs who enjoy their jobs. They are well paid. In Britain, we are trying to build nuclear reactors. We don't have the skilled workforce because we have not put money into that workforce, and now we are struggling because we don't have enough of the workers, and it's taking a long time to build because of that. Everything takes a long time to build. Offshore wind in France takes 8 to 10 years. We should still build it. We still need to think further down the line. But in terms terms of whether or not it's cheaper, the cheapest electricity to consumer was in France, the most expensive was in Germany. What did Germany do? Just very quickly, 2011, Germany reacted very badly to the Fukushima Daiichi power plant meltdown, even though the meltdown didn't actually kill anybody. It was the tsunami itself that harmed people and the earthquake. Germany reacted very badly. They phased out 11 nuclear power stations, became more dependent on imports, especially from Russia, Nord Stream pipeline. All these decisions were made deliberately, and they were the wrong decisions. And they realize that now because the 3 remaining nuclear power plants that they were phasing out, they're now keeping them open, but only until next April, because I don't know, like maybe you don't need energy in April, who knows? But we need to make scientific decisions. We need to make evidence-based decisions and not phase out clean energy in favor of other clean energy. This is silly. In Britain, anytime our wind or solar capacity drops, generation drops, then we import coal. Like, that's just what happens. So what we need to do is that needs to be nuclear, not coal. So we can have an energy abundant future, plan for an energy abundant future, because that is what our modern lives are completely dependent on. And if you don't see that privilege, go to a country where people are crying out to have the same access to electricity, to just the lights working when you turn on the light, to heating in the winter, to air conditioning in the summer, because billions of people live in poverty around the world. They do not have access to this. We are very privileged. So let's not just take things off the table because we don't like them.
France does not have the cheapest electric energy, but in the Nordic countries. Why? Because they have huge hydro potential, huge renewable sources. That's serious. I can prove it to you scientifically on the basis of data. That's one. Second, nuclear energy is not easily sustainable. Most of uranium comes from Russia, it comes from Australia, but it's far away and it's very expensive to transport it.
We can't take something off the table because it requires importing, you know, whatever, uranium. We also import lithium. The polysilicon required for solar panels, that completely comes from China. There's no way around that, but I'm not saying that we shouldn't invest in it. I'm just saying that's not an argument. If we look at all of the countries in the world and the ones that have decarbonized, there is no large developed grid in the world for a large population, for an industrial nation, that has been able to decarbonize without a huge amount of nuclear and or hydropower. Yes, we're talking about Nordic countries. Even Sweden does have about 35%, I think, hydropower. They also have about 35% nuclear.
We survived blackouts in the 80s. It is something what can be survivable.
People die in heat waves in Britain because we don't have air conditioning. And when there isn't heating, it is the same thing. And I think this is really important because in Britain, where the electricity prices are quadrupling, people cannot afford to warm their homes. People will suffer and get sick and die.
The perspective of the price of energy transition and the risk of changing one dependency to another, from dependency on Russian gas to dependency on Chinese production, how can Europe avoid that?
One could say, because prices are high, what we should do is to create a cap or to manage the market. But I think in a short term, in a few weeks' time, maybe it could give results. But in the long run, it is something which doesn't really offer a solution. The best element for providing cheap energy is to increase the supply of energy by various means, including renewables, including all energy sources, including nuclear, which is a clean energy, much cleaner than, for example, energy used from background coal in Germany and in Poland. People do not realize that burning lignite, you make emissions not only CO2, but also plenty of mercury and plenty of radioactive substances, much more than from nuclear power stations. But therefore, it's a question of a mix, it's important. We need to create a situation in the future we've got sufficient energy to our needs. Obviously, we could limit a bit our needs, we could insulate, we could reduce, we could make more efficient mobility and so on, but we have to also provide sufficient supply of energy. This would also reduce the price. The problem with caps on this moment is that those who use it inefficiently are also able to price which is lower. It means that you support more rich, those who use a lot, those who are inefficient and those who are, they could afford. So if there is a problem with energy poverty, you should address mostly those who are affected by this poverty. So it would be much better to say, let's help them in different ways, but not just to regulate via price. You know, I still believe that Europe has got a great potential in innovation. So our advantage is innovation. That's true that the mass production has been moved to some other countries, but innovation is something that Europe could count on. And in energy area, I think there is a plenty of potential to develop new things which are not yet fully employed.
Energy abundance, energy sufficiency. Are we in a finite world? Will we always use more energy? Will we always have to generate more? Like, these are kind of interesting questions. The citizens' alliances we've seen in France, the energy cooperatives in Belgium, the Citizens' Council in Ireland, these actually have a big role to play also in social innovation, I would say.
In Belgium, nowadays some companies install solar panels for free. You re-inject what you do not consume into the grid, and what we are told is that the invoice will decrease by 30%. And this is something that is also being done in Andalusia. Obviously, the sun is not a problem in our region. The problem might be a lack of water rather than a lack of sun, and we have wind.
Yes, absolutely. This is the only and best solution. It is the solution when the consumer is the producer, when citizens produce their own energy, consume their own energy, and can manage their electricity bills. Up until now, it has not been possible. Insulation in all parts of Europe is sufficient nowadays. This is good news, and solar panels are the best option. People are starting to realize that in Europe we have citizens living in energy poverty and that we need to help them. In the next 15 years, we could reduce energy poverty by 15 to 20% in Europe.
Billions of people still live in a small fraction of energy that we use daily. They sometimes have got no access to energy. And this is a huge problem. And I think we are somehow responsible for delivering technology to address this issue as well. And they want also to live in a dignified standard. So they want to use more energy. So the world needs more energy. That I agree fully with you. I mean, it's not only us that would like to reduce a bit, maybe, but it has to be the world that is delivered more energy. The second problem is the prosumers. You have quoted a Belgian example. I think you have to always be careful with examples. I'm living in Belgium, so I know a bit. You could have installed on a roof. What you are being taken is not an excess of energy. You have been taken the green certificates. You've got it for free installation, but de facto you pay for it in the long run. The problem here, and that's a very significant economic problem, there are many things that could be done, but they pay in the long run. So there is a question of financing model. If you insulate, it costs you investment now, which are insignificant, but it will be saved over the long period of time. So we need a way of approaching this type of combining long-term or because I mean, just to give you an example, I talked to a developer who have insulated new houses with a small, not very thick layer. And I asked him why he's doing that. He said, I cannot put more because it's more costly. Even at the moment of investment, it's less costly than later. Because I have to sell it, and people do not buy if it's more expensive. So I have to make it cheaper, and cheaper by having less insulation. And I said, but they will pay less later. But he said, for those who invest, it's not important, because they pay now, and savings will be later. So we have to work on the models to make future savings already felt now.
My parents grew up in energy poverty. They grew up in poverty in the Punjab, in a little village in India, and they migrated to Britain in the 1970s because there was an industrial boom and they were offered factory jobs. And for this, for them, they could not speak English. They did not know where Britain was on a map. They did not have passports. My grandfather fought in the World War for the British, so his children were allowed to come over to have jobs. And I didn't really understand this for a long time. Why would they leave their home, a country where family is really important? They left behind all their family to come to Britain, where they were not made welcome, and there are still issues around that in Britain. And the reason was because they wanted to escape poverty. And I didn't really understand, I admit it, that I didn't really understand, like a lot of people here, until they said, come and meet all your relatives. You have hundreds of relatives in the Punjab, come and meet them. And I went in my 20s. And, the women really do bear the brunt of poverty. They're collecting the water. They're rice farmers. My family are rice farmers, as millions of Indians are. Billions of people live like this around the world. And they're lucky if they gather enough water. They're lucky if the rains come often enough that they have rice. This is now becoming more of a problem. They're already seeing this happen in the global south. Crops are not always efficiently grown now because of climate change. And they just want what we have. They just want their children to survive and thrive. They want to have good jobs. That's why they got on a boat and left their home behind, because there's no lighting. It's just pitch black when it's dark. It's dark. There are snakes that can bite you. I'm not exaggerating. Millions of people die in India of snake bites. That's not because anti-venom doesn't exist. It does exist, but there's no access because there's no infrastructure to get you to the hospital, which is 4 hours away. These are all issues of poverty. And one of the worst things I saw impact women was cooking over these little stoves. They burn wood. If they're lucky, they might get charcoal. Because I say lucky because it lasts longer, but they're breathing it in. And respiratory issues among women are a huge issue there because they're just cooking and just breathing it in. That is why I just say they just need lots of clean energy, because it is killing people. And they shouldn't have to leave their home where they want to stay with their families to come to somewhere that was lucky enough to create this problem by burning lots of fossil fuels. Yes, it did give us a high quality of life, but now actually I think we really have a responsibility to these people, especially if we don't want them to develop by burning lots of fossil fuels. We need to help them to transition to clean technologies so that their children will make it past infancy, and so that they don't have all of the health issues that come with fossil fuels. So people talk about, oh, what about the waste from solar? What about the waste from nuclear? Fossil fuel waste is being stored in the Earth's atmosphere as I speak. It is killing people through air pollution. It is killing our planet. We really need to realize that this, and it is impacting the most poorest people, and often women and children around the world.
Rudolf Kolbe from Austria, country where we have no nuclear power plants, but I have a sister in France where they have the most percentage of nuclear power in the energy mix, and she's telling me that the prices now has gone up the same way than in Austria. So I don't think that nuclear power is cheaper there. I
did not say France has cheap electricity now. Nowhere has cheap electricity now. There's an energy crisis. What I said was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, France did have cheapest cost to consumer, but that is important point, because that's because the power plants run for so long. So although there's a high upfront cost, they run for 60 years, then that does end up paying off. And Germany, before the invasion, Germany's electricity to consumer was 1.7 times more than in France. That's just a fact. You're welcome to contact me afterwards and I can give you the data.
The prices in France on electricity, you have to understand electricity market. The price of the electricity is defined by the most expensive additional producer. So if you've got a base which is given, if you've got a need for additional electricity, you have to use, for example, even in France, you have to use gas, which is much more expensive. And then all electricity has to be equal to that most expensive price. So therefore it goes up. But the base is much more solid in France. But on these changes on the high price.
Solar panels are paid off within 4 years. Afterwards, you have 15 years of low costs, and you have energy counselors in every country in the EU precisely for this. This is good that we're all a part of the EU because the Energy Union provides energy counselors in each town, in each country. There are energy counselors that can help you to make a decision on solar panels and savings.
I'm coming from Greece. We have sun, wind, everything is fine there. But what's going to happen with the energy crisis, the energy poverty? I think that the high prices are here to stay.
High prices for fossil fuels will stay for long, and that's I'm quite sure. However, whether high prices for energy will stay for long, I'm not so. I think we should do a lot to make sure that the prices of energy will go down. But the question of fossil fuels will have to stay high longer.
If you don't own the home you're living in, if you're in the private rented sector, if you're living in subsidised housing, you know, how can, I suppose, landlords be convinced to make those changes, retrofitting and the insulating of homes? But also, how can you get them to do it without, I suppose, ending tenancies and evicting tenants then to do those works and probably increase rent as well on top of it?
The tenant-landlord divide, I guess, or something that we call the split incentive, has been a pressing issue for a long time, and I think under the revised EPBD, the concept of minimum energy performance standards, which are being used in some countries already, will be a major driver for landlords to renovate. I think the private rented sector, it's well acknowledged, has been the most neglected as a general statement, and here we really see the intersection, the necessity for an intersection with social and housing policy.
We are discussing putting photovoltaic on, but you have to have a roof to put it. It means if you don't have a roof, you are out of the system and you pay the real price. So again, you have to look that it divides people, that more wealthy can afford to buy very efficient heat pumps, they can insulate, and they can put photovoltaic on the roof, and they are protected. The situation of tenant and landlord is a very specific one.
Landlords will have to realize that the time of cheap fossil fuel energy is gone. It will be in their best interest to invest into renewables, either solar panels or something else.
No, it doesn't necessarily take rockets to destroy a grid. Well-aimed cyber attack will do the same thing. If we move into a very consumer-driven energy production, solar cells, heat pumps and all that, would that do away with it, or is the fact that we depend on an electrical grid will always make us as vulnerable as Ukraine is now?
If you've got solar panels on the roof, it helps you and your house to have a bit of electricity. You have to have a large roof in order to have a sufficient electricity for your house. Normally, it is not enough. Your roofs are not enough to cover your electricity. However, most of energy is not used for the houses. It's used for industry, and that requires much more production, and it requires grid. Secondly, you know, it sounds very nice, but de facto, having own panels on the roof, it's not equally efficient to the production in a bigger facilities. So it's less efficient. For security reasons, it's very important. For saving energy, for lowering bills is very important, but it doesn't give a solution. I think the best prevention of the vulnerability is to have a peaceful environment much more globally.
Absolutely. The best prevention is peace. Best prevention is peace. But what this gentleman said, this is why it is good to have solar panels, because the critical infrastructure is vulnerable. Had Ukrainians installed more photovoltaic cells, they would have had more energy.
I was a rapporteur on the change of European grids to transport energy, and this is an issue that we addressed maybe not enough in details with the Commission. The transport of energy between member states, which is still insufficient and requires a lot of investment, we wondered how we could include energy coming from consumers who are also producers in the grid. Electricity grids are much harder to manage if energy sources are numerous, especially with intermittent sources. Do we have to centralize everything, or do we have to consume at the point of production? So these are all issues that we have to address if we want to have more decentralized production. But we need every member state and every grid operator to define the acceptable ratio between decentralized and centralized production. We do need centralized production as a backup and for the industry.
We have to combine decentralized and centralized power generation. Decentralized will be in the focus until 2050, and backup must be centralized. Another thing we have to be aware of is that electrical energy is becoming our god. There's no natural gas. It's being phased out. Oil is also being phased out, although neither will disappear. But the energy consumption will focus on electricity.
People who started as green activists a few decades ago are now deeply in politics. They are now decision makers in many cases from Germany. What will that change?
When I started climate activism about 20 years ago, nobody really cared. It was very hard to get attention. We did some really controversial actions to get attention, and it was very hard to get people to talk about climate change. There was a lot of climate denial, and I don't see that now. In Britain now, the polls show that even during the pandemic, people's concern for the environment is really high. It's one of their biggest concerns. That kind of push that came from groups like Extinction Rebellion, which I was a spokesperson for, that's really helped with getting climate change on the agenda. If we really want to see this happen, we have to manage this backlash from people who work in these industries. Like, for example, in Britain, I've spoken to people who fit gas boilers. Well, people don't want gas boilers anymore. They want heat pumps. What's going to happen to them because they're worried about their jobs? So what I've said is that either they need to be offered retraining to fit heat pumps. Okay, I've spoken to some who say, I'm too old for that, I don't want that. Then they need to be offered redundancy packages. We have a shortage of skilled workers in the UK. We need to offer free apprenticeships to people who want to work in installing renewables or working in nuclear power plants. We have a massive shortage in workers in these areas, in STEM areas in general. And so we need to offer these incentives so that workers are on board, because ultimately it's the workers that are going to fix this problem, because they are going to build the plants and the wind farms and all of those things. The green transition has to include just your everyday people who do care about the environment, but most of all they care about being able to warm their homes and feed their children.
There is no quick fix for the huge problem concerning energy. Energy is vital. It is something which powers our lives, and therefore there is a lot of things to be done. Secondly, there is also no cheap fix. It cannot happen without investment. Europe is a large space. 1 trillion in such a space is not really sufficient. It really is a costly exercise. There are people that are going to lose in this process. If you go out from a gas, there are gas power stations, and you have to remove it. You have to think about other things. When discussing, for example, biofuels, there's a question to which extent the biofuels are not using water or other resources, or how they are affecting other things. You have to have an approach which is holistic. I have been accompanying council for many years, and I could see that those who are responsible for the national policies, they have to take into account not only one issue that they deal with, but they have to take into account all the responsibility of the government. This holistic view is something that you have to take when talking about energy transition.
For everybody, thank you very much. Please give one warm applause to our panelists.